I still remember the day my sister, Melissa, called me with that trembling voice that could melt the heart of even the coldest man alive. It was a rainy Tuesday in October, the kind where the sky felt heavy and the world seemed to pause for a moment. "Ethan," she said, sobbing softly, "the doctors found something. It's cancer. Stage 3. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. My phone slipped from my hand, clattering against the floor. My sister, my only sibling, my childhood partner in crime, was dying. That was all I could think about. I sat there, paralyzed, staring at nothing, while her words echoed in my head like a broken record. Before we go deeper into this heartbreaking story, I want to thank you for being here. If you're new to the channel, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if you're already hooked, and tell me in the comments what you'd do if someone close to you pulled a stunt like this. Your support means the world, and it helps more people discover stories like this one. I drove straight to her apartment that evening. She looked pale, thin, and tired, wrapped in a blanket with an A4 stand beside her bed. I couldn't control my tears when I saw her like that. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked. She sniffled, her eyes glistening. "I didn't want to worry you," she said. "The doctor said chemotherapy might help, but it's expensive, Ethan. I don't have that kind of money." That sentence hit me like a dagger. Without hesitation, I promised her I'd help, whatever it took. I called my financial advisor that same night and pulled funds from my savings. I told Melissa I'd take care of her, no matter what it cost. Over the next few weeks, I became her shadow. I drove her to every supposed appointment, watched her swallow pills, and sat beside her when she claimed to be sick from chemo. She'd even show me texts from her doctor and hospital bills marked urgent. My sister had always been dramatic, but this felt painfully real. I watched her hair start to thin. I saw her throw up in the bathroom. She was losing weight fast. Every symptom matched what I'd seen online. I didn't question a single thing because, well, who questions cancer? The day I told our family, everyone broke down. Mom cried so hard she nearly passed out. Our father, who'd passed away 3 years earlier, had left us a comfortable inheritance split evenly between us. Melissa's diagnosis brought us all together again. Old grudges disappeared overnight. For the first time in years, our family dinners were filled with prayer, hope, and tears. Everyone pitched in. Cousins donated. Friends held small fundraisers. I even liquidated one of my investments to pay her hospital bills. I thought I was saving my sister's life, but in truth, I was feeding a monster that wore the mask of my own blood. 3 months in, I started noticing small cracks. Her so-called doctor's office never answered my calls. Every time I asked to meet her oncologist, she'd say he was out of town or in surgery. The hospital receipts looked suspicious. Same font, same handwriting, and strangely similar amounts. But my heart refused to accept the possibility that Melissa could lie about something so serious. I told myself maybe she was just too embarrassed or too scared to admit the truth about her progress. Love blinds us in ways we never understand until it's too late. One evening, while helping her clean her apartment, I found a prescription bottle in her drawer labeled iron supplements. I thought little of it until I saw the date. It was months old. She hadn't been taking any medication for cancer. My heart began pounding. I decided not to confront her yet. Instead, I quietly followed her one morning when she claimed she had chemotherapy. To my horror, she didn't drive to the hospital. She drove to a spa. She spent 3 hours there getting massages and facials. That was the day the illusion shattered. I didn't storm in or scream. I just watched from my car, shaking, while she laughed with the receptionist. The betrayal didn't hit all at once. It crept through me slowly like poison. My own sister had faked a terminal illness, but I still didn't understand why. That answer came later when I checked my father's will. According to the terms, if either of us became terminally ill, the other sibling's share of the inheritance would transfer to them immediately for medical use. My heart froze. Melissa wasn't dying. She was stealing. For nights, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every tear, every hug, every late-night promise to fight this together. I had emptied almost everything I owned to help her. I wasn't just betrayed, I was made into a fool. But one thing about me, I don't retaliate with anger. I retaliate with lessons. Melissa faked cancer to get my inheritance, but she had no idea that I was about to fake something much, much bigger. Something that would make her question everything she thought she knew about control, trust, and power. The night I discovered Melissa's deceit, I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch with the lights off, staring at the blank television screen as if it could somehow reflect the storm inside my head. Outside, rain pelted against the windows, and every drop felt like a heartbeat I couldn't calm. I thought of all those nights I had spent praying for her recovery, all the money I had drained to save her, and all the lies she had wrapped in tears. My sister had faked cancer. Cancer! And I had fallen for it so completely that it made me question my own intelligence. How could she look me in the eyes every day and carry that kind of deceit without flinching? I felt disgusted, not just at her, but at myself for believing so blindly in blood that wasn't worth the loyalty I'd given it. When dawn crept in through the blinds, painting pale stripes across the living room, I grabbed my coat and drove downtown. My destination wasn't the hospital this time. It was Mr. Graham's law office. He had handled our father's estate after his passing, and I remembered how meticulous he'd been with every document. The air in his office smelled like polished wood and coffee, and the sound of paper shuffling filled the silence. He was surprised to see me that early. "Ethan," he said, peering over his glasses, "what brings you here so suddenly? Is it about your sister's health?" I forced a faint smile. "In a way, yes," I replied. "I need to review my father's will again." He hesitated, clearly puzzled by my tone, but fetched the leather-bound file from a cabinet. I watched him flip through the pages until he stopped at the section labeled Disbursement Conditions. My pulse quickened as I leaned forward. There it was, Clause 14b. The words were simple, almost harmless-looking, but they carried the weight of my sister's deception. In the event that one beneficiary is diagnosed with a terminal illness, the remaining portion of the estate shall be temporarily transferred to the ill party for medical and personal care, subject to verification by licensed medical professionals. That single paragraph explained everything. My jaw tightened as I realized Melissa hadn't just lied to me. She had forged documentation to exploit our father's safety clause. "Mr. Graham," I asked quietly, "who verified her condition?" He looked confused. "Why, Dr. Sloan from Westbrook Oncology. Your sister sent all the paperwork weeks ago." My heart dropped. "Would you mind showing me a copy?" He nodded and handed me a folder. I scanned the printed documents, and my blood boiled. The signatures looked sloppy, the dates inconsistent, and the hospital's letterhead was crooked, clear signs of manipulation. "Mr. Graham," I said, my voice barely steady, "Dr. Sloan retired last year. There is no Westbrook Oncology anymore." His eyes widened. He understood instantly. "Ethan, are you saying this was forged?" I nodded slowly. Every word. The silence that followed was thick. "Mr." Graham sighed deeply and rubbed his temples. "I can't imagine your father would have ever foreseen this," he murmured. "This clause was meant to protect, not divide." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, fighting the nausea building in my chest. Protect, not divide. That was exactly what my father had always said about family. Protect, not destroy. And yet here I was, realizing that the person I had trusted most had weaponized that very protection against me. I thanked Mr. Graham and walked out into the morning light, though it felt like darkness still followed me. As I sat in my car, one thought consumed me. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. People like Melissa thrived on control. The moment you showed anger, they twisted it into guilt. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. No, I would dismantle her world one lie at a time. If she had faked cancer, I would fake something far greater, something that would unravel her from the inside. That's when the idea came to me like a whisper in the back of my mind. Disappear. I reached out to an old friend, Aaron Cole. a cybersecurity specialist I'd known from my university days. "I need to disappear," I told him over the phone. He laughed at first, assuming I was joking. "Disappear? What is this, witness protection?" But when I told him everything, Melissa's lies, the forged documents, the money, his laughter faded. "You're serious," he said. "You want to fake your own death?" I paused. "No, I want her to believe she caused it." Aaron was silent for a moment before sighing. "Ethan, you've always been too kind. If you're doing this, you better be sure." I was, more than ever. Over the next week, I started crafting the illusion. I changed my digital trail, canceled meetings, and stopped answering texts. I even left subtle signs online, posts about being tired of everything and needing peace. People would notice, and Melissa, with her guilty conscience, would notice most of all. Meanwhile, Aaron helped me set up a temporary identity. New phone, new location, new account. I'd vanished cleanly, leaving behind nothing but questions. But I wasn't finished yet. I hired a private investigator named Carla to dig into Melissa's activities. Within days, she sent me a dossier that made my skin crawl. Melissa had taken out personal loans in my name, forged my signature, and funneled money into accounts labeled medical expenses. She wasn't just greedy, she was ruthless. She had lied to everyone, including my mother, convincing her that I refused to help financially anymore, painting herself as the brave sister carrying the burden alone. My mother, heartbroken, had even given her part of her retirement fund. The level of manipulation was almost artful. I knew then that exposing her would take more than evidence. It required guilt, genuine, unbearable guilt. And guilt only grows in silence. So, I planned my disappearance down to the smallest detail. On a foggy Wednesday morning, I left my car parked by a lakeside, keys in the ignition, phone smashed nearby. The police would find it. They'd assume the worst. I wrote a single note, short, haunting, and deliberate. "I can't take it anymore. I feel empty. Please take care of Mom." It was the perfect blend of despair and ambiguity. Enough to break her heart, but not enough to prove I was gone. When the news broke 2 days later, Melissa flooded her social media with tributes. Photos, crying videos, paragraphs about grief and forgiveness. She became the grieving sister overnight, and the world applauded her strength. Thousands of sympathetic comments poured in. "You were such a good sister. He's in a better place now. Stay strong, Melissa." I sat in a small cabin 2 states away, watching the post from my laptop, sipping coffee, my face lit by the dim glow of the screen. Every fake tear she shed was another rope tightening around her neck. But the most beautiful part? While she mourned me publicly, my investigator quietly began leaking anonymous tips about her fake illness and financial fraud to the same people who praised her. And soon, the cracks would show. She had buried me in lies. Now, it was my turn to bury her in truth. The morning after my supposed death broke on the local news, I sat by the cabin window watching fog roll off the quiet lake, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hand. It was strange watching my own disappearance unfold from afar. On TV, the anchor spoke my name like I was a ghost, a tragic story of a man who couldn't bear life anymore. The police described finding my car, the note, the smashed phone. Everything had gone perfectly. I could almost hear Melissa's voice in my head, rehearsing her grief, ready to play the part of the heartbroken sister in front of the cameras. It was poetic justice. She wanted sympathy, and I had given her the stage, but this time she didn't realize she was performing in my show. I spent the next few days monitoring her every move online. The internet had turned her into a symbol of resilience overnight. She posted pictures of us from childhood, me holding her hand on her first day of school, the 2 of us laughing at our father's retirement party. Her captions were sickeningly sweet. "You were always my protector, Ethan. I wish I could have protected you too." Thousands of likes, hundreds of comments. People adored her. The same woman who had stolen my inheritance, drained my accounts, and faked a terminal illness was now being praised as a beacon of love. I couldn't decide whether to laugh or vomit. She was the perfect actress, too perfect, and that perfection was about to crumble the moment the truth surfaced. Carla, my private investigator, kept feeding me updates. "She's not slowing down," she said over the phone. "She's already liquidated another account, the one under your joint authorization. She thinks the bank hasn't frozen it yet." I smiled faintly. "Let her take it," I said. "The higher she climbs, the harder the fall." Carla hesitated. "Ethan, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've seen people destroy others for less. You're sure about this plan?" I looked out the window again, watching the reflection of my own face against the gray water. "I'm not destroying her," I said softly. "I'm giving her the mirror she's avoided her whole life." 2 weeks passed before the first crack appeared in Melissa's flawless mask. A local journalist named Patrick Evans reached out to her for an interview about mental health awareness, inspired by my death. It was meant to be a tribute, but Patrick wasn't an ordinary reporter. He was the same journalist who'd previously exposed a charity scandal in our county. When he began asking Melissa about her cancer journey and treatment timeline, her answers turned vague. "It's been a blur," she said nervously. "I was in remission right before Ethan, before he—" She stopped mid-sentence, biting her lip. Patrick pressed gently. "Which hospital treated you, if you don't mind sharing?" Melissa stammered. "Westbrook Oncology." Patrick's brow furrowed. "That clinic shut down last year." That 3-second silence became the longest pause of her life. When the interview aired, the clip went viral. People started asking questions. The same audience that had once showered her with love now filled the comments with suspicion. "Wait, didn't that clinic close? Something doesn't add up. She looks too healthy to have gone through chemo." Melissa tried to spin it, posting long emotional messages about misunderstandings and private treatments. But lies are fragile things. The more you patch them, the more they fall apart. Meanwhile, I continued to live like a shadow. I stayed off social media, used a burner phone, and communicated with Carla through encrypted messages. Every night, I'd scroll through threads of people debating whether my death was real or a part of something darker. A few conspiracy theorists even claimed I was alive, and they were right, though none could prove it. Watching them argue was like watching spectators at a theater, unaware that the playwright was sitting right behind them. One afternoon, Carla sent me an email with the subject line, "You'll want to see this." Inside was a photo, Melissa leaving a downtown cafe, visibly shaken, holding her phone close to her chest. The caption from a gossip blog read, "Ethan Miller's sister breaks down after being accused of faking cancer." Her eyes looked haunted. Her perfect composure was cracking, and beneath it was the same guilt she had once made me drown in. I zoomed in on her expression, her trembling lips, her vacant stare. That wasn't grief anymore. That was fear, but fear wasn't enough. She needed to experience what I had: loss, confusion, silence. So I took it a step further. Using Aaron's skills, I had a few anonymous emails sent to her from untraceable sources. Each message contained fragments of information only I could know, details about her forged documents, the fake prescriptions, even the forged doctor's signature. One message simply said, "The dead, don't forget." Another included a single image, the view of the lake where my car had been found. Within hours, she deleted her social media accounts. The grieving sister vanished from the internet overnight. A week later, Carla reported that Melissa had stopped showing up at her favorite restaurants. She barely left home. Neighbors noticed her curtains stayed closed all day, and she was seen pacing on her balcony at odd hours of the night, staring into the street like she expected someone to be there. She had begun calling Mr. Graham repeatedly, demanding updates on reinvestigating the inheritance, hoping to secure what was left. But Graham had already frozen everything pending review after I'd shown him the forged documents anonymously. Melissa was broke, paranoid, and trapped, a ghost haunted by a ghost. The irony didn't escape me. She had faked illness to manipulate emotions, and now her own mind was eating her alive. The walls of her deceit were closing in. Even our mother, once blinded by sympathy, began to question her. "Melissa, are you sure you were ever really sick?" she asked one evening on a recorded call I later listened to. Melissa broke down crying, yelling, "Why does everyone keep asking that?" I could hear Mom's voice trembling. "Because the truth always finds a way out, darling. Always." That night, as I sat in the cabin, I realized something strange. I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. Revenge wasn't a fire anymore. It was a slow, flickering candle burning itself out. But I wasn't done yet. The final act was coming, and this time, I wasn't just going to haunt her. I was going to make her confess, not to me, but to the world she had deceived. She had made me into a ghost. Now, I was going to make her into a legend of disgrace, a woman who buried her own family for greed and then exhumed her guilt with trembling hands. And it all started with one message. "Melissa, I'm not dead." When I first told Aaron the plan to return, he said it sounded theatrical. He was right, it was. But theater is what people remember. Theater is what forces a crowd to stop pretending. I had watched Melissa perform sorrow on the smallest of stages. Social media posts, sympathetic fundraisers, the kind of private sobs that always found a camera or a sympathetic ear. If her lies had become performances, my comeback had to be a showstopper. Not to humiliate for sport, but to force truth into the bright light where lies can't breathe. I did not come back as a ghost smashing through a door or as some cinematic deus ex machina. I came back like a man who had learned how quiet can be louder than shouting. 2 months after the lakeside, I returned to the state under a name only Carla and Aaron knew. My clothes were ordinary, my haircut unremarkable. I walked the streets like any other stranger. I booked a modest room above a bakery and watched Melissa from the corners of public spaces, from the coffee shop where she used to meet friends, from the church pews she'd frequent on Sundays, where she now sat alone with a hymnal she didn't know how to use. The world had moved on in the odd way the world does. People scrolling, sympathetic hashtags fading into new tragedies, the memory of me reduced to a few recycled posts and a donated bench in the park. But in the places that mattered, the family circle, the small town's rumor mill, the wound I left had become raw, and Melissa's performance was fraying at the edges. Her phone rarely stopped buzzing, not with comforting messages anymore, but with questions, whispers, and then toxins of doubt. Anonymous tips had begun to circulate. Copies of forged receipts, mismatched letterheads, bank records of transfers to accounts under different names. Carla had been the needle sewing those threads into a tapestry, threading evidence in a public view without ever revealing her source. My return was measured. I didn't announce myself. I applied to volunteer at a local shelter under the alias Mark Reed and spent 2 days helping serve meals. I attended a civic meeting where Melissa, invited to speak about surviving grief, sat under halogen lights and read from notes she thought would make her saintly. She spoke about loss, about giving everything, and watched the room with the hunger of a woman waiting for affirmation. That night, after she left, I stayed behind and talked quietly with a few people who had approached her that evening. They mentioned how warm and composed she'd seemed, how she'd smiled for cameras, how she'd said the right things. The first public crack that I orchestrated came less from a dramatic reveal than from a quiet confession I arranged to elicit. I contacted Patrick Evans, the journalist who'd originally placed the wedge into Melissa's facade, and gave him a lead that would draw her to a live radio interview under the pretense of discussing charity work related to cancer survivors. He agreed. The station was a small one, with a lunchtime audience of people who love gossip and honesty in equal measure. I sat in a parked car outside the building and watched her stride in, hair carefully arranged, a scarf draped just so. She carried the perfume of someone who had time for appearances. On air, Patrick was gentle but persistent. He asked about treatment timelines, oncologists, and the specifics of care. Melissa answered in the vague, polished tone of someone who'd rehearsed grief. But then Patrick began to read, on air, a few documents he'd recently found, documents that hadn't been public before. He read the hospital letterhead that matched the forged one Carla had uncovered, the loan forms signed with my name in a shaky pen, the invoice numbers that circled back to the same suspicious account. There was a pause on the air that could be felt like a hell breath. Melissa's face drained color. Off mic, the producer whispered to Patrick that callers were already flooding lines, wanting to ask direct questions. I sat in my car and felt something old and fierce in my chest, the need for truth to be louder than the lies. The station's phone bank lit up like a constellation of accusation, and Melissa stammered, attempting to patch each hole as it appeared. She offered vague explanations, clerical errors, identity theft, everything a practiced liar uses to buy time. But people on the line were not placated. A woman who'd donated at a church fundraiser demanded receipts. A man who'd given $1,000 for urgent chemotherapy said he'd been sent to the wrong address for weeks. Even a cousin called in, voice cracking with betrayal, asking how she could sleep at night. When Melissa left the studio, she was not the same composed woman who'd walked in. She was raw, a portrayal of someone unraveling. I could have walked up to her then, ripped off the costume, and shouted everything I knew. Instead, I let the radio do my job. Patrick's piece was followed by an editor's note the next day that compiled the anonymous tips Carla had sown into the gossip streams, financial records, discrepancies in medical providers, and witnesses who'd seen Melissa at places she never mentioned publicly. The internet, fickle and swift, caught the scent of scandal. My actual return to the family was slower and more surgical. I arranged for my name to appear in an online obituary correction, a small, anonymous notice from someone pretending to be a distant relative that read, "Ethan Miller, reported deceased 2 months ago, was later found to be alive. Investigation pending." It was a breadcrumb that set off a chain reaction. Family members called each other. The funeral bench became a talking point. My mother, who had been suspended between grief and suspicion, called Melissa directly. Their conversation was a private thing I could not and did not intrude upon. But later that night, when Melissa stormed into the house where her mother lived, voice cracking and accusing, she found a front door unlocked and the house empty. There was a single envelope on the kitchen table with a note in my handwriting. "I wanted you to feel what I felt. The rest is up to you." That simple note did what months of evidence had begun to do. It cracked the armor of justification. Melissa started to confess, not in public yet, but to the people she thought would never turn on her, to a childhood friend who'd co-signed for a loan, to a cousin who'd wired her cash. She cried, apologized, begged. Some forgave her. Others recorded the confessions and sent them to Patrick. I watched as the net we'd woven tightened inexorably. Banks froze accounts. Mr. Graham reopened the papers, and the county began to ask uncomfortable questions about the transfer of funds under Clause 14b. But the greatest blow was quieter and would need no courtroom to land. Our mother, whose heart had been eaten by grief and devotion, began to recenter. On a gray afternoon, she came to the bakery where I'd been working, sat across from me as if she'd known all along, and said only, "Ethan, why?" I could not tell her everything. Not yet. My admission would have imploded more than it healed. Instead, I told her what I could. That some people hurt others and then pretend to weep for the damage. That sometimes the only way to unmask them is to let the light find them. She folded her hands and cried quietly, not for my death now disproved, but for the theft of trust. By the time Melissa's first public apology hit the local news, it was hollow and legal in tone, a carefully worded statement crafted by an attorney whose fees she could ill afford. It named regret and errors, promised cooperation with inquiries, and insisted upon privacy for the family. People watched, and some nodded with relief. Others had heard too many of these statements before. The town that had once rallied around her charity began to look elsewhere for its heroes. I did not stand on the sidewalks to see her shamed. I didn't need the spectacle. The truth was doing its work. The bank statements, The recorded confessions, the radio interviews, these were louder than any shout. Yet even as doors closed, new ones opened. Legal processes creaked into motion, but more importantly, the person I had once been gullible, trusting to a fault, began to reappear. I felt for the first time since the lakeside something like peace. It was not victory. Revenge had never been a feast. It was the quiet relief of knowing that the truth, finally, was waking people up. There's one last thing I wanted Melissa to know, not through a lawyer or a news brief, but in a voice that could not be edited or minimized. I arranged for that to come later, at a time when the town would be listening and when she could not deny the sound of it. When that day came, when the silence I'd created would be broken by my own voice, it would not be to celebrate her ruin. It would be to show her what her lies had done. Not to me, but to the small, ordinary lives that had believed her. And when my voice finally cut through her rehearsed sobs and staged prayers, the room would know the difference between a tear and a lie. The day of my return came quietly, without warning, like the way dusk replaces day before you realize the light has changed. I hadn't planned it for spectacle. I'd planned it for truth. Melissa had spent months hiding behind apologies crafted by lawyers and posts filled with forced humility. But what she didn't realize was that the one thing stronger than denial is a familiar voice, especially one believed to be gone forever. And that's exactly what I intended to use against her. The town's annual charity gala had been rescheduled that spring, the same event Melissa once used to collect donations for her fake cancer treatments. Ironically, this year's theme was rebuilding trust. Tickets were sold out. The mayor would be there. Local news outlets, too. It was the perfect stage, poetic and complete. Through Aaron, I arranged for the event organizers to receive an anonymous contribution from the Miller Foundation for Ethical Giving, a fictional nonprofit I created. The foundation offered to sponsor the evening's video montage, a short film about truth and redemption. No one questioned it. Why would they? Donations heal all curiosity. For 2 weeks, I worked with a video editor to assemble the reel. It opened with soft piano music and photos of real local heroes, teachers, doctors, volunteers. Then, halfway through, it cut to Melissa's face, smiling, accepting checks, crying to microphones, pretending to be weak. Beneath each image, the screen faded to black with white text. The truth does not hide forever. Then came the voice, my voice, calm, deliberate, unmistakably alive. Good evening, everyone. I'm Ethan Miller. Some of you believed I was gone. Some of you mourned me. But I was watching how a lie can spread when told with tears. Watching how greed dresses itself in sympathy. Tonight, I want you to see the truth. The footage transitioned into scanned copies of her fake medical documents, the loan records, and voice clips from her recorded confessions. I had blurred sensitive details, not for her sake, but for integrity. I didn't want to destroy her life beyond repair. I only wanted her mask on. When the lights dimmed in that hall and the video began, I was in the crowd, sitting quietly in the back. The moment my voice filled the speakers, the room froze. I watched heads turn, confusion ripple, and whispers ignite. Melissa's glass slipped from her hand and shattered against the marble floor. Her lawyer, seated beside her, looked like he'd seen a ghost. And in a sense, he had. She tried to stand, stumbled, and then sat back down, pale and trembling. When the lights came back on, the hall wasn't clapping. It was silent, the kind of silence that buries reputations. She turned slowly, scanning the crowd as if expecting to wake up from a nightmare. When her eyes met mine at the back of the hall, the color drained completely from her face. She covered her mouth, whispering, "Ethan." I didn't move. I just nodded once, not in anger, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement. She had created this ghost, and now she had to face it. Security was called, the press swarmed, and the event spiraled into chaos. But I didn't wait around. I slipped out before anyone could reach me. I wasn't there for confrontation or applause. I was there for closure. By the time I got back to my car, my phone buzzed with dozens of messages from Carla and Aaron. "It's everywhere," Aaron said. "Every network is replaying it. You just burned her lies to the ground." Melissa's downfall was swift, but not theatrical. Within 48 hours, sponsors withdrew their support. The police reopened her fraud investigation. Her public apology was replaced by a court statement, and every person she'd manipulated demanded answers. Yet even as the legal gears turned, what haunted her most wasn't the charges. It was the voice. My voice. She had to live knowing that the brother she betrayed was alive, watching, and unwilling to let her rewrite our family's truth. In the weeks that followed, I avoided the spotlight. Reporters tried to find me, but Aaron ensured my trail was minimal. The focus stayed on Melissa, and for once, I didn't need to lift a finger. The truth was finally louder than her act. The same community that once idolized her now whispered about her downfall with pity and disdain. My mother, though, didn't gloat or curse her. When we met again, she simply said, "You could have left her to destroy herself, Ethan." I nodded slowly. "I know," I replied. But then she would have still believed she could lie her way through life. This way, the lesson lasts. That night, I returned to the same lake where I had left my car months ago. The water was calm, moonlight dancing across its surface like ripples of memory. I stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet. Revenge, I realized, doesn't heal pain. It only balances it. What healed me was truth. It was watching lies collapse under their own weight and knowing I didn't need to become like her to win. When I finally turned to leave, I whispered into the night, "Goodbye, Melissa." Not with hatred, but with finality. Some ghosts don't linger to haunt. They stay long enough to make sure the living remember why they existed at all. The days following the gala felt strange. Not triumphant, not vindicating, just still. The kind of stillness that comes after a long, violent storm. The video had done more than just expose Melissa's deception. It had rewritten her entire identity in the eyes of the community. The same people who had once held candlelight vigils for her recovery now crossed the street when they saw her. The same neighbors who dropped off food baskets and sympathy cards now whispered behind half-closed doors. What she had built on tears and lies was gone, and in its place stood silence. The silence of a woman the world had finally stopped believing. I kept my distance. Watching her fall wasn't about enjoyment. It was about balance. For so long, Melissa had lived in a world where her lies shaped reality. Now, reality was shaping her. Every newspaper headline, every social media thread, every awkward stare at the grocery store chipped away at the image she'd crafted. Her name became shorthand for fraud in the small town. People would say, "Don't pull a Melissa," when they meant don't fake your pain. That was all the punishment I had ever needed her to face. Not prison, not public humiliation, just truth, raw, unavoidable, and permanent. Carla called me one evening to update me on the legal proceedings. "The state's picked up the fraud charges," she said. "They found enough evidence to make it stick. But honestly, I don't think she'll see real jail time. First offense, partial restitution. She'll probably get probation." I was silent for a moment. Prison wasn't the point. "Let the law handle her," I said. "I've handled my part." Carla chuckled softly. "You sound like a man who's tired of winning." I smiled faintly. "You don't win in family wars. You just stop losing." But even as her world burned, I couldn't ignore one thing. My mother. The whole ordeal had aged her. Her hair had turned almost completely gray, and though she tried to hide it behind soft smiles, guilt lived in her eyes. Guilt for believing Melissa, for doubting me, for letting money become a wedge between us. When I finally went to see her, she opened the door slowly, as if afraid that I might vanish again. "You're really here," she whispered, her hand trembling on the doorknob. "I never thought." Her voice broke before she could finish. I stepped inside and hugged her, the kind of long, wordless hug that years of hurt can't fully heal but can begin to soften. We sat together on the couch, and she reached my hands. "I should have seen it, Ethan," she said. "I should have known she was lying." I shook my head gently. You saw what you wanted to see, Mom. Hope makes fools of all of us. She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. She called me yesterday, she whispered. Said she wanted to talk to you. Said she wanted forgiveness. Forgiveness. The word echoed in my mind like a challenge. I wasn't sure I had it in me yet. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because some wounds lose their meaning if you pretend they never cut. What'd you tell her? I asked. My mother sighed. I told her that forgiveness isn't something you ask for, it's something you earn. Her answer lingered between us like a truth neither of us wanted to admit. Over the next few weeks, I learned to live quietly again. I found a small apartment on the outskirts of town, returned to my old job under my real name, and started rebuilding the life Melissa had tried to ruin. It wasn't easy. There were whispers, curious stares, even a few awkward questions about the disappearance. But I didn't explain. Some mysteries serve their purpose best when left unsolved. The only people who needed to know the truth already did. Then, one evening in early autumn, I got a letter. No address, no return name, just my first name written in familiar handwriting that trembled like regret. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. Inside were 3 folded sheets and a small photo, a picture of Melissa and me as kids, standing beside our father, holding paper airplanes. The letter began, Ethan, you can hate me, and you be right too. I've hated myself for months now. I don't even know who I am anymore. The worst part isn't that everyone knows what I did. It's that I finally know it too. I can't undo it. I can't rewrite it. But I can tell you that every night, when I close my eyes, I see Dad's face. I see the look he'd have given me if he were alive to see what I've become. That look is worse than any sentence the court could hand me. I've started volunteering at a hospice center. The irony isn't lost on me. I help real patients now, people who actually fight for their lives, not for money. I don't do it for forgiveness. I do it because I need to feel something honest again. I don't expect you to reply. I just wanted you to know that I remember the girl who used to make paper airplanes with her brother, and I hope someday that's the version you remember too. I read it twice, maybe 3 times, before folding it back into the envelope. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just sat there, letting the words settle. I knew it wasn't manipulation, not this time. It was the sound of a woman finally facing herself. Maybe redemption doesn't always come wrapped in apologies. Sometimes it comes in the quiet act of change. That night, I walked down to the lake again, the same one where my story had paused months earlier. The reflection of the moon rippled across the surface like a memory revisited. I took out the photo from the envelope and laid it gently on the water. It floated for a moment before sinking slowly beneath the surface, like the final chapter of something I didn't need to reopen. As I turned to leave, I whispered to the night, "You're free, Melissa." It wasn't absolution. It wasn't approval. It was release for both of us. And in that moment, for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt something that almost resembled peace. Peace, I learned, isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with thunder or triumph. It sneaks in, quiet as a sigh, and you only realize it's there when the weight you've carried finally starts to fade. The weeks after Melissa's letter were the calmest I'd had in years. I didn't rush to reply. I didn't tear it up either. I left it on the mantel by the window, folded neatly beside a small candle I kept for evenings when I needed to remember that light doesn't always come from forgiveness. Sometimes it comes from the decision not to keep hating. Every morning I walked past that letter, and every time I did, I felt a shift. It wasn't pity. It wasn't affection. It was understanding. Melissa and I had both been prisoners. She'd agreed, I to resentment. The irony was painful. She had lied to feel powerful, and I had lied to make her powerless. The truth was, I hadn't just faked my death to teach her a lesson. I'd done it because I wanted to feel control again. Control over the story she had stolen from me. But revenge, no matter how clever, doesn't give you control. It gives you emptiness dressed up as justice. One night, I found myself replaying memories I'd long buried. I remembered how we used to sit under the porch light after Dad's long workdays, folding paper airplanes out of old newspapers. She'd always write something on hers before throwing it into the wind. Little wishes like, I want to be rich, or I want to see New York. I never wrote anything. I just threw mine and watched it fly. Maybe that was always our difference. She wanted more. I wanted peace. By late October, the investigation against Melissa concluded. She was sentenced to 2 years of community service and ordered to repay partial restitution from what assets she hadn't spent. The court spared her prison, citing her cooperation and mental health records. The town's gossip burned hot for a few weeks, but time, as always, diluted the flames. People moved on. New scandals replaced old ones, and a woman once labeled the cancer liar became just another cautionary tale whispered in the grocery aisles. But what I didn't expect was the invitation. It came on a crisp Sunday morning, tucked in a plain white envelope without a return name. Inside was a handwritten note and a small printed card that read, Community Hospice Annual Thanksgiving Volunteer Dinner. Beneath it, Melissa's handwriting, neat, careful, and unfamiliar in its restraint, said, I know you don't owe me your presence, but I'd like you to see what I've become, even if from afar. Dinner starts at 6. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the silence remain intact, clean, final. But another part of me, the quieter, older part, felt something different. Maybe curiosity, maybe closure. So that evening, as the sun began to fall behind the old willow trees, I drove toward the hospice center on the outskirts of town. The parking lot was half full. Volunteers moved in and out, carrying trays, laughter spilling into the cool evening air. Inside, the hall glowed with warm yellow lights. I stayed near the back, blending into the soft hum of conversations. And then I saw her. Melissa. She looked older, not in years but in truth. Her hair was shorter, her makeup minimal, her clothes simple. There was no performance in her posture anymore, no practiced grief or polished smile. She was listening to an elderly woman in a wheelchair tell a story, nodding with real empathy. When the woman finished, Melissa laughed, genuinely, and handed her a small plate of food. For a moment, I forgot why I had come. She didn't see me, not yet. I didn't approach her. I watched as she moved from table to table, helping, listening, serving. There was a stillness to her now, the kind that only comes from people who have finally faced themselves and survived. At one point, one of the staff members, a man maybe in his 60s, clapped her shoulder and said something that made her smile through tears. I could tell it wasn't flattery, it was gratitude. I left before she could notice me. But as I stepped outside, I realized something had shifted in me too. The hate had burned itself out, leaving only understanding behind. I didn't know if she had found redemption, but she was at least walking toward it, and maybe that was enough. That night, I went home and finally took the letter off the mantel. I unfolded it one last time, tracing the ink where her pen had hesitated over certain words, and then placed it inside an old wooden box that held family photos, Dad's watch, and a few of my childhood mementos. The box wasn't a grave. It was a memory, a place for the things that once hurt to live quietly instead of haunting me. Over the next few months, life settled into a rhythm. I started writing again, not letters this time, but short essays about truth, family, and the strange mercy of consequences. It was Aaron who convinced me to publish them anonymously online. You've got a story people need to hear, he said. Not about revenge, about aftermath. The series gained quiet traction. People commented about their own betrayals, their own roads to forgiveness. Some said my words helped them sleep better. Others said it made them finally stop chasing payback. For the first time in years, my pain had purpose. And then, one morning, I got an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line simply read, "Thank you for writing. You don't know me, but I read your essays every week. I used to be someone who hurt people for attention. Then someone hurt me the same way. I've spent years trying to be different. Reading your story reminds me that maybe change is possible. Maybe it's never too late to become honest again." There was no name at the bottom, but I didn't need one. The writing style, the small slant on the T, the way the Y curved just slightly inward. It was Melissa. I didn't reply. Some messages don't need answers. They just need to exist. That night, I walked to the window, watching the moon reflect off the same quiet lake that had once been my grave. The air smelled like autumn, old leaves and endings. I thought about my father, about everything he taught us before he left. Truth, he used to say, is like water. You can't burn it. You can only dirty it for a while. Melissa had tried to drown it, and I had tried to weaponize it. But in the end, truth had done what it always does. It found its way back to the surface. And maybe that was redemption enough. Truth has a strange weight to it. It doesn't crush you all at once. It settles over time, like sand filling the cracks of something once hollow. For months after the hospice dinner, I lived quietly, almost invisibly, trying to understand what peace was supposed to feel like. Some nights it felt like calm. Other nights, it felt like guilt wearing calm's disguise. People think that when justice is served, the pain dissolves. It doesn't. It lingers, reshaping itself into new forms. Silence, reflection, sleeplessness. Sometimes, I'd catch my reflection in the mirror and wonder if I had done the right thing, or if I had simply become the villain in another version of Melissa's story. My essays continued to grow in reach. The anonymous series, After the Fire, became a quiet phenomenon. People didn't know who I was, but they saw themselves in my words. Betrayed sons, forgotten daughters, siblings who had fought over money and inheritance, they all wrote to me. Some sought forgiveness. Some sought revenge. Some just needed someone to admit that healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. I never revealed my name. It wasn't about recognition. It was about truth existing on its own, detached from my history. The irony was that the more I wrote, the less angry I became. One evening, as I sat by the window drafting another essay, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Ethan. The voice was fragile, but familiar. My mother's. I didn't mean to startle you, she said softly. I just wanted to tell you something. I turned off the lamp and listened. She's doing better, she continued. Melissa. She's been consistent at the hospice. She helps patients, talks to their families. The staff say she's the best volunteer they've had. I didn't know how to respond. That's good, I said finally. My mother sighed. She misses you, you know. She talks about you in the past tense sometimes, like you're still gone. Maybe it's easier that way. After the call ended, I sat for a long time in silence. I thought about the strange shape of forgiveness, how it bends and stretches, how it resists finality. Part of me wanted to meet Melissa again, to see if the remorse in her letters was genuine. But another part of me feared it. What if seeing her reopened everything I had closed? What if forgiveness demanded more from me than I was ready to give? A few weeks later, I received another letter. This one wasn't handwritten. It came from the hospice itself. Inside was a simple note from the director. Mr. Miller, your sister has nominated your writings for our annual Voices of Redemption reading night. We would be honored if you would attend anonymously or share a new piece for the event. I stared at the letter for a long time. The idea of her reading my words aloud to a crowd of strangers, not knowing they were mine, felt surreal. But something inside me knew I had to go. On the evening of the event, the hall was softly lit, filled with patients, volunteers, and locals. I sat near the back again, just as I had during the gala months earlier, though this time the air was different. No tensión, no deceit, just quiet anticipation. When Melissa stepped onto the small stage, there was no applause for fame or pity. It was the kind of respect people give to someone who's tried to change. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back, a small silver cross around her neck. She looked like someone who had finally accepted her place among the living. Not above them, not beneath them, just among them. She began reading from one of my essays, her voice steady but tender. Revenge is a mirror that shows us our pain, not our power. You think it will make you lighter, but it only teaches you how heavy resentment really is. True justice doesn't come from someone else's downfall. It comes from learning to live without needing one. Her voice cracked on the last sentence. She paused, exhaled deeply, and looked out at the crowd. These words, she said softly, belonged to someone who understood pain better than I ever did. I hurt people I loved because I was afraid to face myself. But these words remind me that truth can heal, even if it hurts first. Whoever wrote them saved me. The audience applauded quietly, and I felt something inside me break. Not in pain, but in release. It was strange hearing my own forgiveness spoken back to me by the person who had wounded me most. For a brief moment, I wanted to stand up to tell her it was me. But I didn't. Some truths are more powerful when they remain faceless. After the reading, I lingered by the exit, watching as she greeted guests. Her laughter was quiet, but real. She was no longer pretending to be the hero of her own story. She was just a person trying to live with what she'd done. And maybe that was enough. When she finally turned toward the back of the room, her eyes brushed past me for a moment. It was quick, almost nothing, but in that half-second I saw something flicker. Recognition? Instinct? Or maybe the quiet understanding that ghosts can live among us long after we stop haunting them. I slipped out before she could look again. Outside, the night was cool, the air carrying the faint scent of rain. I walked past the hospice garden, where lanterns swayed gently in the breeze, and thought about all the people inside, dying, healing, forgiving. I realized then that truth wasn't a sword I had wielded against her. It was a mirror we had both been forced to face. When I got home, I opened my notebook and began writing the final essay of the series. There are two kinds of ghosts, the kind that linger to torment and the kind that linger to remind. I was both once, but the longer I stayed, the more I understood that revenge doesn't set you free, honesty does. Not the honesty you demand from others, but the honesty you owe yourself. The kind that makes you look at the person you became while chasing pain and say, enough. I ended it with a line that had been growing in me for months. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge is simply choosing to live better. When I published it, I didn't expect anyone to notice it more than the others. But that essay spread further than anything I'd written. People quoted it, shared it, and turned it into something bigger than my story. Melissa sent no letters this time. She didn't need to. I already knew she'd read it. That night, I finally slept without dreams. For the first time, there were no echoes, only quiet. Years passed quietly after that night at the hospice. My essays had long since found their own home in the world, published under a pseudonym that no one ever traced back to me. After the Fire had become more than a series. It had become a refuge for strangers seeking understanding. Readers wrote from all over, sharing their own stories of betrayal, redemption, and a fragile hope that pain could eventually give way to peace. I'd respond sometimes, other times I wouldn't. Healing, I had learned, wasn't a destination you reached. It was a place you returned to every day. Melissa had faded into the background of the town's story, no longer infamous, no longer pitted. She lived simply. She still volunteered at the hospice, and from what Mom told me, she'd moved into a small apartment nearby. She didn't chase sympathy anymore, didn't post about good deeds or cry for an audience. She simply did. It was strange, watching her become the kind of person I used to wish she'd been all along. It made the idea of seeing her again feel both inevitable and terrifying. Then one afternoon in early spring, I got a call from my mother. Her voice carried that fragile tone I'd come to recognize, the one people use when they're holding something heavy. "Ethan," she said quietly, "Melissa's not well." My heart dropped. "What do you mean?" There was a pause. "It's real this time," she whispered. "She's been diagnosed with lymphoma. Stage 2. She didn't want to tell you, but her voice broke. She's been asking for you." I sat there for a long time after the call ended, staring at the wall as old memories came rushing back. The phone call years ago when she'd said those same words, the lie that had started everything. But this time, there was no performance, no manipulation. Just the cruel irony of truth arriving too late. A week later, I walked into the hospice where she volunteered, where she now stayed as a patient. The halls smelled faintly of lavender and antiseptic, the kind of scent that clings to both comfort and endings. The nurse at the front desk led me to her room, her expression gentle but knowing. When I reached the door, I hesitated. My hand hovered over the handle for a moment before I pushed it open. Melissa was sitting by the window, sunlight spilling over her face. She looked frail, thinner, paler, but peaceful. When she turned and saw me, her lips parted slightly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence felt alive, filled with years of things unsaid. Finally, she smiled weakly. "You came," she whispered. I nodded and stepped closer. "Yeah," I said softly. "I figured it was time." She chuckled, a fragile sound that ended in a quiet cough. "You always did have a bad sense of timing." We both laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was human. I sat in the chair beside her bed. "How are you feeling?" I asked. She shrugged lightly. "Better some days, worse others. But for the first time in my life, I'm not pretending anymore." "That's something, right?" I nodded. "That's everything." She looked down at her hands, tracing the edge of her blanket. "Ethan, there's something I need to say before." She stopped herself and smiled faintly. "Before I run out of courage." I leaned forward slightly, waiting. "I lied to you because I thought I was losing control," she began. "When Dad died, I felt small, invisible. You were always the steady one, the one everyone trusted. I thought if I could just get a little more attention, more money, more sympathy, maybe I'd matter. But every lie I told took me further from the person I wanted to be. When you disappeared, I thought I'd killed you. Not just literally, but spiritually. And in some ways, I did. You became a ghost because I made you one." Her voice broke then, and she covered her face with trembling hands. "I've been carrying that for years," she said through tears. "Every patient I cared for, every person I held while they died, I saw you in them. I kept wishing I could tell you how sorry I was." I reached out and took her hand, thin, fragile, shaking. "You just did," I said. "And for what it's worth, I already forgave you." She looked up, eyes wide and wet. "You did." I nodded slowly. "A long time ago. I just didn't know it yet. I thought forgiveness meant forgetting. But it doesn't. It just means the anger doesn't control you anymore." Melissa let out a long breath, like someone exhaling years of guilt. "You know," she said softly, "I read your essays every week. I knew it was you, even if no one else did. I could hear your voice in every line. I used to sit here at night, reading them aloud, like prayers. That admission hit me harder than I expected. All the nights I'd spent writing alone, believing I was speaking to the void, she'd been listening. Then I guess we were still talking after all," I said quietly. She smiled, the faintest curve of her lips. "You always had the last word, didn't you?" We talked for hours that day, about Dad, about Mom, about life, about the strange ways pain shapes us. She told me about the patients she'd helped, the ones who died holding her hand, the ones who taught her how to live again. She said she didn't fear death anymore, not because she was ready for it, but because she'd finally made peace with who she was. When visiting hours ended, I stood to leave. Melissa squeezed my hand weakly. "Ethan," she whispered, "thank you for coming back to life. I needed to see that before I go." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "You're not gone yet," I said. "And even when you are, you'll still be here, in the truth." She smiled, eyes glistening. "That's the first honest thing I've ever wanted to be part of." I left the hospice as the sun was setting, the sky a tapestry of gold and violet. The world felt quiet again, but not empty this time. It felt full of endings, yes, but also of peace earned through pain. That night, I wrote my final entry for After the Fire. It wasn't an essay. It was a confession. My sister lied, and I hated her for it. I faked my death, and she paid for it. We both became ghosts trying to haunt each other's guilt. But in the end, the truth didn't destroy us. It saved us. Not because it made things right, but because it made us honest. And maybe that's all redemption really is. Honesty that arrives too late, but still matters anyway. When I published it, I didn't check the comments. I didn't care about the response. I closed my laptop, blew out the candle on my desk, and let the night settle around me. Outside, somewhere beyond the hills, I imagined Melissa sleeping under the same sky, at peace for the first time in decades. And for the first time of mine. It happened on a quiet Thursday morning, the kind that carried no warning. My mother called again, her voice thin and trembling. "She's gone, Ethan," she said. There was no preamble, no soft build-up, just the truth, stripped bare. Melissa had passed peacefully during the night, the nurse said. No pain, no struggle, just a slow, steady fading, like a candle running out of wax. I sat in silence for a long time after the call ended, the world around me suddenly distant. It's strange how death steals sound. Even the birds outside seemed to pause. I thought I prepared myself for this. After all, we'd said everything that needed to be said. But when it finally came, I realized that closure doesn't silence grief, it just gives it meaning. For the first time since my father's funeral, I cried. Not for justice, not for regret, but for the simple, unbearable ache of loss. Melissa's funeral was small, humble, and sincere. Everything her first death had not been. There were no cameras, no speeches crafted for pity. Just family, a few hospice staff, and quiet music drifting through the air. My mother sat beside me, clutching a handkerchief. She looked older but lighter, like she'd been carrying a burden she hadn't realized was hers too. When it was my turn to speak, I stood before the simple wooden casket, hands trembling slightly. Everyone watched, waiting for the brother who had once vanished to say something about the sister who had once lied. I took a deep breath. My sister and I began, spent years building walls made of pride and silence. We both thought truth was something you could control, something you could twist to make people love you or fear you. But the truth doesn't bend. It breaks. And when it breaks, it forces you to look at the pieces. I paused, scanning the faces before me. My mother's tears, the hospice volunteers' soft nods. Melissa taught me something I never expected to learn. I continued. She taught me that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what someone did. It's about choosing not to live inside it anymore. It's about understanding that sometimes the person who hurt you the most is the one who needed love the most, and they just didn't know how to ask for it. I looked down at the casket then, my voice softer. I forgive you, Mel. I already did. And if you can hear me now, I hope you know you're finally free. There were no sobs, no applause, just a silence so thick it felt sacred. A peace that didn't demand understanding. I stepped back to my seat, and for the first time in my life, I felt the weight of her name lift off my shoulders. Not erased, just finally set down. After the burial, the hospice director approached me. "Your sister left something for you," she said. She handed me a small sealed envelope with my name on it, written in her familiar handwriting, still shaky, still careful. I waited until I got home to open it. Inside was a single folded page and a photograph. The photo was of the two of us as kids, sitting on the porch, launching paper airplanes into the summer sky. On the back, in her handwriting, she'd written "One last flight." The letter was short. No theatrics, no apologies this time. Just truth. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I finally got it right. I've spent years running from myself, from what I did to you, to Dad's memory, to everything that mattered. But you gave me something no one else ever could, the chance to end as the person I should have been all along. I used to fake illness to feel seen. Now I understand that being real, even when it hurts, is what makes life worth living. Don't carry my ghost anymore. Use my story instead. Maybe someone else out there still has time to change before it's too late. Love, always, Mel. I read it 3 times before folding it gently back into the envelope. Then I went outside to the backyard, the same one where we used to play, and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. I folded it into a plain, careful, deliberate. On the wing, I wrote her name, and then I threw it into the wind. It caught the breeze, rising high before tilting and gliding out of sight. For the first time in years, I smiled. In the weeks that followed, I decided to end my essay series. Not because I ran out of words, but because I had finally said everything that needed saying. I wrote one final post titled "The Lesson Left Behind." I used to think truth and love couldn't exist in the same room, that one would always kill the other. But I was wrong. Truth doesn't kill love, it purifies it. My sister's lies destroyed what we had, but her honesty in the end rebuilt something stronger. Not between us, but inside me. I learned that forgiveness isn't a gift you give someone else. It's the key you use to open your own cage. And once you walk out, you don't owe the world your pain anymore. You owe it your peace. When the post went live, thousands read it. But I didn't check the comments. I didn't need to. I knew her story, our story, had done what it was meant to do. It had turned pain into purpose. Months later, I visited the hospice one last time. They had dedicated a small garden bench in her name, engraved with words from one of my essays, "The truth doesn't destroy you. It saves what's left of you." I sat there for a while, watching the wind rustle the flowers she once tended. I thought about how far we'd both come, from lies to lessons, from death to meaning. And as I got up to leave, I whispered, "Rest well, Mel. You finally told the truth." Then I walked away, not as a ghost, not as a victim, but as a man finally alive, carrying her final lesson with me. If you've listened this far, thank you for walking through this story of truth, loss, and redemption. If it touched you, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Not just to hear stories, but to remind yourself that sometimes, even after the deepest betrayals, honesty can still heal the heart.